Hey, it's Kat in Toulouse. This is Beyond What's Said, where we explore the hidden dynamics behind communication, confidence, and how we connect with each other.
That's right. And today we're dealing with the topic of why negative information, negative feedback tends to stick more than anything positive, and maybe try to find some ways around these sort of tendencies that we have.
That's right. So don't forget to download our episode, like and subscribe if you haven't done so. And let's get right into it. Lately, I ran a series of workshops. They were really fun. You know, it was with a bunch of high school kids at different schools. And we talked about first impressions, connection, like how do you make a good first impression by, kind of revving up your self-introduction. How do you hold a conversation with a stranger or with a peer or with an adult? And it went really well. Like I put in a lot of work and I really made sure I put on a good show. And the immediate feedback was really good. Like people were engaged. And the survey also showed overwhelmingly positive results. But there would be like, I'd say out of like 100 or so, maybe a handful, not even double digit, mediocre feedback would be like, oh, there could have been more activities or it was okay. They weren't even bad feedback, like, oh, this person sucks. But that just sat with me. And I'm telling you, like, out of like 100, right? It's like not even 10% of that is mediocre feedback. And that just sat with me for a long time. There was one comment that said, like, oh, I still think this part is a little too shallow.
Gotcha.
And they're constructive feedback, and I think, like, okay, these are good data for me to further refine my workshop. But there was still a big part of me that just kept ringing in my head. It's too shallow. It's too shallow. It's too shallow. And it started affecting how I felt about myself and my performance and my product.
Yeah, and it's funny, we even decided to like run some fun basic statistics to see the sort of before and after effect of your workshop. And, we saw that statistically there was even right down to the responses we got from people, which is all done on a kind of Likert scale, right? We saw that there was genuine improvement from the before and after, right? So prior to the workshop, they had this particular perspective on their public speaking, how they introduce themselves. And then afterwards, we saw a clear difference just based on the numbers. And not to say that numbers are, foolproof, they'll never lie, but we even added like statistical credibility to the end product. And yeah, no,
Even
that
then,
still doesn't
it's
do it.
still, it's weird that we do that. I noticed that I do that. I'm trying to get better about it. And I think it does tie back to many of the episodes that we've spoken in the past, where we talk about what is our self-talk, what is our belief in ourselves, and that active practicing of like receiving success, registering success, and not just focusing on the failures or the mistakes, if you will. And in this case, it wasn't even mistakes or failures. It was just constructive feedback that perhaps didn't meet my, I don't know, my ego's expectation or something like that.
I think though it's also, you have to run like sort of an opposite thought exercise here, because if you're going to start falling apart over the little criticisms that you get, 2-3 responses out of God knows how many, now imagine yourself receiving a majority of negative feedback.
That's right.
Now imagine that, the majority felt it was shallow. It didn't hit the mark. It didn't quite do what it set out to do, right? What then? Would you completely fall apart? Would you give up on your craft? Would you just pack your suitcase and move to the next town?
I've shared this with you in the past before, and I feel like that's the thing. In the past, I have limited my ability to grow and to become a better artist at the time, or a better coach, or a better athlete, precisely because I couldn't handle any negative feedback, even if it was constructive or even if it wasn't ultimately negative. I would immediately feel flustered and I would go, well, I'm just never going to be good at this, or I don't want to embarrass myself anymore. I should just always expect rainbows and sunshines and praises and nothing but good things and positive affirmation. And so over time, I look back and I go, I have greatly hindered my potential because of that mentality.
No, I think this is where the importance of the value forward framework that you've put forth previously, and which is a core part of your workshops. But no, I think it's important that failure is part of learning, it's part of growth. There's no way in which you can practice a skill or develop competency in anything without honing all sorts of patterns of success and doing the thing right, but also patterns of failure. Like knowing what doesn't work is an equal part of that process, that journey. But I think knowing that you have inherent value, inherent growth capacity, like you're not finite in your abilities, in your potential, always keeping that in mind, I think it lessens the blow of criticisms. And it does allow you to kind of look at people's pushback on what you're doing and be like, okay, look, not everyone's going to completely agree with what I have to say, respond positively, or sometimes, quite frankly, just care. Like that's another, that's another form of criticism, people not paying attention to your message, to what you're all about, right? And in your case, in a room full of jaded teenagers, that can happen quite often. And what's great though is that, so far in your workshops, like we've seen a lot of teens engage with this idea of finding your worth, finding your value, articulating that. But yeah, you're going to run into people that are like too shallow, not enough activities, more jokes, please.
It's funny when I occasionally see feedback like more jokes, please, from teenagers, right? Because they're obviously enjoying the workshop that I did. They're laughing and all that stuff. But I'm also not doing a stand-up routine. Like, don't forget, we're here to learn.
Mm.
It's a workshop. I'll throw in
Mm.
a bunch of jokes and you guys are having fun. But like, more jokes, please. Look, if you want more jokes, you're going to have to come and see me at the comedy center over down like, like 8 o'clock at night.
That's why I enjoy teaching, because teaching sometimes feels like, well, it's not always like this, but I like to do a little bit of stand-up style crowd work with my students. And if it hits, it hits. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And who cares? I'm a teacher. Like I'm not here
No,
to, they're not paying me to make jokes.
I lean into my aging millennial kind of angle. So
Mm.
it's like if they don't get it, I make it funny anyway by
Yeah.
playing that kind of like that.
One of your students, well, one of our students, what is it? Holy Unk.
Holy unk.
Holy Unk, which is Unk short for uncle, or is it short for uncool? And that was a
That was a discussion. I
that was a
literally was
discussion.
like, are you saying uncle? And is there a holy auntie? Holy aunt?
Yeah, see that. So right now, this is sort of a meta moment where we're probably performing the aging.
Well,
like,
it was also the whole when I was taught, clock it, and they're saying
Oh,
that
yeah.
with the thing where you take your fingers and you
Cool.
snap them together,
Yeah.
and that's clock it.
Yes.
And then I go, yeah, but when you clock something, you have a timer. So shouldn't the hand gesture be like you clocking
Give a
the timer?
a tiny timer.
Yeah, even then you would do this, like, So anyway, that is we just went off track there.
That's fine. That's all part of the game.
It's all part of the game. So anyway, looping back to what we were saying, what I was trying to say is that we tend to focus on the negative more than a positive, and in terms of feedback.
Mm.
And what I find very interesting in my own observation, as well as observing like either my students or my clients or just the people around me, a lot of times if it's a positive feedback, they'll sound like they're doubting the authenticity or the truthfulness of the positive feedback.
Yeah.
But when it comes to how they talk about or how we talk about the negative feedback, it's almost like they receive it as absolute truth. And I found that to
Yeah.
be really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great stuff out there. And we've covered this on the podcast previously, the role of negativity bias.
Yeah.
Our brains will value negative stimuli, negative information more than anything positive.
Yeah.
And there are like evolutionary survival reasons behind this. I've mentioned it in previous episodes. And it's fascinating. They've done studies showing that there's more brain activation when people in experiments are shown certain images or certain negative stimuli, right?
Yeah.
And they've noticed that depressed or anxious individuals, when examined on a brain level, there is greater amygdalar activation, the amygdala being the part of your brain that sort of looks for or processes emotionally salient information, right? So we know in clinical populations that they will overdo it with the negative inputs,
Right.
and that will dysregulate them. And this mechanism exists in, non-clinical, like people without these conditions. We do this as well.
Yeah.
This mechanism is central to being a human being, because at the end of the day, things that are negative and threatening and dangerous will motivate you more because it's about self-preservation. We're trying to survive.
The image that I'm seeing in my head while you're saying all this is if there's threat, there's movement, right?
Mm.
And if there isn't any, if, everything is all good, it's just this like resting pose that our cats do. Like, it's just
Yeah.
everything's fine. And so I think like there is perhaps like a connection. Like I would say I'm a very ambitious person.
Mm.
I tend to want to have something that motivates me or
Mm.
moves me forward. Like I almost feel scared to stop sometimes. And it's not like I don't ever stop, but it is something that I actively need to tell myself, be like, hey, don't forget to rest.
Yeah.
Hey, don't forget to slow down for a second and take care of yourself. Like, not everything is a threat. Not
Yeah.
everything is, a competition, or you just need
Yeah.
to keep going and going and going. I think like my brother and I, we are very similar in that regards. Like, we're both very ambitious people and we both have very high goals. We have many goals and we always try to be like, I remember he was really into David Goggins for a while. Like
Yeah.
he told me about like David Goggins, and he would literally do like runs with Goggins in his ear, and he would try to. And I remember
Guilty. I've kind of done it
You've done
sometimes.
that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I have toyed with the idea of doing that, but then I haven't really done that because first of all, it's too hot in Guangzhou right now, and second of all, I'm still not a fan of running. So
He would probably do just fine.
Oh, he would do
in
fine.
the blistering Guangzhou heat.
Oh no, of course. But I remember this thing that he said. He's like, I don't want to be soft.
Mm.
And this is kind of the relationship that my brother and I have. We say these very intense things to each other, but that is in a way that how we motivate each other because, like I said, we've always been very ambitious people. And I remember this. So back then when I was maybe 12, and he's 6 years older than me, so he was about 17, 18. I was like 11 or 12, right? And I knew I wanted to be a singer back then. And so he's like,
Can't
"You want to
remember
be a
the story.
singer? Okay, all right. So this is how I'm going to motivate you." He's like, "If in 3 years' time, or no, it's 3 or 5 years, he's like, if in this time period you don't become a famous singer, then you have to run around our neighborhood block naked. And if you do become a famous singer, then I will run around naked around the block." And I was like, all right, deal. So that gives you a bit of a picture of what kind of like it's messed up, but also very unique and loving relationship I have with my brother. And so I remember when he said like, it's like, I don't want to be soft. So that's why I need to keep going. I can't just rest. And at the time, it resonated with me too. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be soft. I need to always train myself to be hard on the inside and physically as well. And at the time, I was a coach, a CrossFit coach, weightlifting coach, a weightlifting coach as well. And so it was that physical toughness plus the mental toughness that I aspired to be, but more so because I was scared that I would be deemed as soft and weak.
Okay.
And so I would use a lot of that chip on the shoulder, kind of that Goggins style, like, come on, you're not good enough and things like that. But as I got into my late 30s and a lot of things happened in life and also meeting you and reading a lot more books, plus a post-COVID wave of positive psychology or mindset, messages that are being spread, I started examining myself and be like, hey, is this really necessary?
And I think Goggins is a fascinating individual, just an insane athlete as well. And I think that he's often said in many interviews that his life story is so unique and idiosyncratic and full of just really awful things that he's had to deal with and overcome. I think, though, there's always going to be a kind of a Goggins in us. There's always going to kind of be that voice that pushes us, that makes us aware of our imminent demise or destruction, or at least that we're in some kind of rat race and or some kind of competition, and we don't want to get left behind. We don't want to fall behind. And I think that's perfectly normal to have some source of motivation, some fuel source that leans on that. But one thing that I've learned from my time just doing different sports and competing, whether weightlifting, obviously most recently jujitsu, and I've did dragon boat for a few years. It's
Mm.
the amount of like camaraderie or handshaking and like solidarity that happens in these competitions. Like for me, it's always been, it's fun. It's joyful. We're shaking hands. We're talking in between rounds or in between lifts or in between races in the case of dragon boat. And I feel like that sort of like, I have to be tough. I have to be hard. That's important maybe in the moment while you're kind of trying to perform at your best, but everything else in between is usually, like I said, it's joyful and it's about making friends and it's about
Mm.
its growth.
Yeah.
Like, hey, don't take this too seriously. Like
Yeah.
we're going to have fun and exceed our limits.
Yeah.
And there's a weird way in which a whole bunch of people trying to exceed their limits, trying to work at their fullest potential all at the same time, there's connection there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to have a little bit of that gritty, tough, like, hey, I really got to knuckle down and do this, but lower your guard and be like, hey, this isn't 70,000 years ago, and there's a whole bunch of threatening predator animals or germs or microbes that are just going to absolutely demolish us at any given moment. I mean, there's still a lot of things that could kill us in the modern world, but the need to update the sort of the operating system, sometimes the human operating system leans a lot on these ancient threats. And sometimes we take that built-in tendency of fixating on these ancient threats and we apply it to things that quite frankly are not threatening at all. If anything, they're good for us. They fuel our motivation to do better, to grow, and to improve.
Yeah, so it's like bringing that back to your scenario and applying it to our day-to-day life, right? The need to be hard, or need to be tough, the need to keep going
Yeah.
and pushing and pushing and pushing. It's almost just like the unhealthy thing would be when there are moments of in between sets and you're shaking hands and connecting with
Yeah.
friends. You're like, no, if I shake hands with this person, then I'm going to be soft. And like, I
Yeah.
can't stop. I can't enjoy myself. And it's like, you're going to burn out. You're
Mm.
going to perpetually be going, going, going. You lose connection with the people around you,
Yeah.
lose touch with the world around you, and then become this kind of very narrow purview, which we talked about in a previous episode about narrowing the musting and the shoulding.
Yeah, of
I
course.
must do this and I should do this.
Mm.
And that narrows you to a very single and lonely kind of
Yeah.
lane. And I think that that's where it becomes really unhealthy. When we look at feedback, that is your opportunity to, connect with the world around you.
Yeah.
And when you only focus on the negative stuff, you're perpetually making that even smaller and smaller, as
Yeah.
opposed to focusing on, yes, constructive feedback so you can be better, but also registering that success, registering that positivity from the community or the audience or, the
Yeah.
people around you so that you can be like, well, thanks for that. Hey, let's go and have a beer,
Yeah.
something like
No,
that.
I think there's something that you touched upon there, that feedback is an opportunity to gain a connection with, could be a mentor, it could be your peers, your family, it could be those around you,
Mm,
the larger community, right? It's like it allows you to realize that, hey, people are invested in making me a better person.
mm.
And that, I think, ultimately it raises everyone's boats because we're all kind of learning from each other in this process of taking risks and being vulnerable and putting ourselves out there. And like you said, if you fixate on the negative,
Mm.
you're not listening to those around you. You're not really taking in the feedback seriously. You're obsessed with flaws and things that didn't go your way. And I think you're shutting out the possibility of truly growing by way of support from those around you.
Well, it's also like what I found interesting is we often look at positive compliments or
Mm,
positive regards or positive feedback
mm,
as almost like it's not really true. It's almost inauthentic. So
yeah,
it creates this doubt towards the reality around you.
yeah,
But when they say something negative, you're like, yes, I knew it. I
yeah,
knew I wasn't perfect. So,
yeah,
now I'm going to take that as absolute truth, which then becomes really like is it even grounded in
Yeah.
facts or in truth? Like, why are you taking that as absolute truth and then doubting all the other 90%? Much like in my workshop, it's like,
Yeah.
why am I doubting all the other 90% of positive feedback and I'm fixating on the 10%?
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting and a bit frightening to knowing this piece of information, there was one great study that I stumbled upon, and to make a long story short, it talked about how the negative information just almost definitionally hits harder in the
Mm,
brain. It triggers mechanisms that just have higher intensity compared to anything positive. So it's almost like, yeah, we're always seemingly going to have this more visceral reaction to
mm,
negative information. And then to the point where, like you said, you take the negative criticism as this kind of gospel and everything else is just fluff, just like
mm.
trying to lessen the blow of the fact that you just failed at something. Right. So it is tough. Like half the time, I don't want to sound like, we're fighting against our neurobiology or our built-in tendencies. But I think that, the brain is this really interesting, malleable thing, as we've learned throughout this podcast, and in just anywhere in general. You'll learn about neuroplasticity, about self-talk, and about the way in which you can reframe reality to empower yourself. And I think in this case, there's a lot of things we can do. Like you said, pause, celebrate success, find an opportunity to connect with the people giving you feedback,
Yeah.
and you know ask questions as to, well, what specific aspect of your craft that you could have improved, and why, right?
Yeah, I think like that's a really important one. So rather than taking negative feedback at face value and not questioning, be like, okay, thank you for giving me that feedback. Could you elaborate on that? Like,
Mm,
where specifically did you
yeah.
find that it wasn't? And, a lot of times you'll actually find that when you're willing to ask those questions, not in like defense to be like, tell me
Mm,
exactly what you mean,
yeah.
it's more like, hey, I'm really curious because I want to learn. A lot of times they will either share very generously, which would then become really concrete data for you to
Yeah.
improve, which is the purpose of this anyway.
Yeah.
Um, or you'll find that they actually went, oh, actually, no, now that I think about it, it was actually good. It was
Yeah.
actually not what I thought it was,
And I
kind of
I
thing.
think, that's sometimes you separating the haters from the true kind of constructive criticism. But yeah, sometimes if you seek clarification, you'll get confirmation that this was either, someone almost like reactively pointing to
Mm.
something negative, or like this person actually had a thoughtful contribution to make.
That's right. And so it's important to, again, knowing where your core value is, having such anchored position in your own values, knowing that, okay, this person is their opinion
Mm,
and what they say may help me improve or they may not. And
yeah.
that's okay. I don't need to take that personally. I think that would generally contribute to our mental health. And we wouldn't have to constantly be like chip on the shoulder, everyone's out to get me and
Yeah.
I just need to keep going like, like Goggin style. Let's go.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. And sometimes you're gonna need to have a Goggins moment in the thick of battle, in the
That's
thick of
true.
whatever it is that you're doing. But I think, much like I always think about historical knowledge, just broad context of the world and how it came to be, is very empowering. And there's a lot of complexity and messiness and darkness to the world we have today. And simple historical baseline knowledge of a time and place will do wonders in terms of, like, oh, I guess this is why these variables are, seemingly having an impact here in X part of whatever region. But same with psychology, and knowing about negativity bias, and knowing that this is kind of the default operating
I think
system.
that's been really
Yeah.
helpful because it's like being able to identify that, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. It's not that I'm just perpetually broken. Being able to label and identify that is very helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's one of the big paradigms in neuroscience right now, the idea of predictive processing. Like, your brain is basically constantly scanning for inputs, but it's creating like a model of the world based on prior predictions. And basically, if you are the type of person now that checks yourself every time you get into a negative mood because of feedback, it's like, no, like, I'm going to actually take this as a learning opportunity, and I'm not going to immediately fall prey to that spiral of negativity bias. And if you catch yourself doing that over and over again consistently enough, I think the brain will kind of build perhaps a new set of predictions where you're like, actually, feedback isn't threatening. Feedback is valuable and it's helpful. And yes, I may feel a little bit crappy in the moment, but at least I know that my reaching for negativity is more a function of just me being a human being and not some like deficiency that I have.
So you talked about earlier that studies have shown that people's amygdala fire a lot more when they are exposed to negative stimuli
Mm,
versus positive one. And so I think now there's so many neurosciences reels that talks about
yeah.
when you're able to label and identify what you're feeling at the moment,
Mm,
it takes that reactive reflex from the amygdala, that firing like, all right, right, right,
yeah.
right, to the executive functioning part where you can
Yeah.
think logically and go, actually, I'm just feeling a bit tired, a bit frustrated, or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And that calms your nerves down.
Yeah, they talk about the bottom up processing, which is, the amygdala activation, those emotional inputs, they from the lower brain regions, right? And then you have the top down kind of regulation, which is, the executive functioning, the prefrontal cortex, right? And it's this very delicate dance that needs to happen between the two in order for us to feel regulated, right? Like emotions are important signals. They're there to tell us that something's wrong or something isn't quite where it needs to be. But if we let the top down processing completely take over, and then those, cognitive control areas, they're at a deficit, then yeah, it's going to feel like we're crabby, and we're going to amplify or heighten every piece of negative feedback that we get more so than we need to. Everything we experience is going to feel like a threat to our ego or just a threat, period.
Yeah. So in this episode, we have covered a lot of really good points here. And so just to sum it all up, next time you find yourself in a spotlight, like presentation, performance,
Mm,
interview, whatever
yeah.
it is, competition, right? And you find yourself focusing a little too hard on the negative
Mm,
aspect of things, irrespective of an overwhelmingly positive feedback, just take a moment to pause and go, am I doing the negativity bias thing?
yeah.
Am I focusing too hard on this? Am I taking the negative stuff as absolute truth?
Mm,
And am I doubting the positive feedback as like something that's ingenuine?
yeah. Mm,
Maybe there's some really constructive things and you should definitely take note of that.
yeah.
But by and large, just compartmentalize whatever else, and then focus on the positive stuff.
Yeah.
So that way it trains and registers the success into your brain
Mm,
so that you can try to replicate that success in your
mm,
next run.
yeah.
Much like how we talked about in the last episode,
Yeah.
how growth also happens when you register success, not just what you can learn from your failures to try to avoid
Mm,
repeating that. It's also what went right. How can I replicate that again?
yeah.
And so really, really important to start focusing on the positives as well,
Yeah.
but not basking in it. Not like, because that goes back to, like the fear of being soft, right? Like, I don't want to ever
Yeah.
bask in it too long, or else I'm going
Yeah.
to turn into my cat who's just perpetually, with her big belly and just like,
She's literally right there right now.
she's right there right now. I'm
Yeah.
literally looking at it, describing
Yeah.
what she looks like. Um, but I think take a healthy amount. And much like kind of how you said before, it's like, yes, we need grit, we need perseverance and hard work during that competition time or
Mm,
during that performance time
yeah.
or en route to reaching your goal.
Yeah.
But in between sets, to use exercise analogies, in between your sets, take a moment to, have a chit chat with your teammate, have a chit chat with your friends and relax and enjoy
Yeah.
kind of the
Absolutely.
the process and things like that. So that's all we have for today. We'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.